There we go. All right, I've got the recording started.
Okay.
All right,
Working?
so yep, whenever you're ready, go for it.
Okay, so my final project is called NexdMovie. I'm Parker Billinger, and my advisor was Dr. William Chu. So the inspiration behind my project, I love watching movies, and in the age of streaming services, as you can see there, there's just so many options. There's just so many places you can watch movies, and there's so much to choose from. And for me, lots of the time when I'm trying to pick a movie, I almost spend more time like picking the movie than actually like watching the movie, just because there's too many choices. And there's a site called Letterbox that I really enjoy using. And anytime I watch a movie, I'll go onto Letterbox, and you can give it a personal rating, from like 0 to 5 star, or like half star to 5 stars. And so each time I watch a movie, I'll go into Letterbox after and give it a little rating and a review. So I'm holding all this information on what movies I like, and Letterbox holds all that information on each user, but it doesn't give any recommendations itself. So I thought there's kind of an area lacking there. And so, that's where I came up with the idea for my project, which is called NexdMovie, because it'll integrate Letterboxd and into a different my website NexdMovie that will use personal ratings that give the user a next movie to watch. And so basically, just the way the simple idea of how it'll work is it'll take a Letterboxd username, and then if it's a valid user, it'll take all their ratings and scrape all their ratings, and then find movies that are similar to the ones that have been rated highly, or that they've rated highly personally. And so just a little bit of background in my related work, just in the classes that we've taken here at K-State, and our CIS 400 class, is kind of a good, intro to some like full stack software development. In that class, it's not, as we'll get into later, it's not exactly the same way. In that class, it was more, razor pages and some different website techniques, but it was a good intro into kind of having a back end and a front end and making those work together. And then in CS 501, that was just a good class that helped me understand general software structure and how to design programs to work effectively together. And then just in my internship work, I've done some work with React, which is what I ended up using for the front end. And so that just gave me just a little brief intro into what I'd be doing. And then side projects, I've done some like Python work to like scrape data with just like side personal projects. I made a project that scrapes baseball stats with Python, and so that I had some experience with that as well. And so when making my project, I had a couple like general, minimum viable product that I wanted to make. What is essential for the product, and and what's essential is being able to get the information from Letterbox, using some type of algorithm to suggest the movies based on that data, and then display the recommendations in some type of context that was readable. And so then the version 1.0 goals, which were I was able to all complete, which we'll see later, the features that were like important, was just have a usable website that was simple to use and had a clean UI, something that's kind of, that doesn't look, like it was made in the 90s, but also at the same time, it's just kind of simple and made to work, like easy to use. And then also be able to like display movie posters and additional movie information. And so, it would be nice if you just give you a list of titles, you can look up those titles, but if you're able to kind of see more information on the movie, that can help you, have an informed decision when you're finding the next movie to watch. And also have links that kind of coordinate use between Letterbox and NexdMovie. I wasn't able to like integrate like Letterbox, that you can't like sign into your Letterbox account and directly add to your like movie list from my site. But as we'll see later in the demo, there are some ways that you're able to kind of work between Letterbox and NexdMovie that are helpful when using the website. And so I've got into it a little bit already, but the tech stack that I used to make this project, I used React JS for the front end, which is just kind of help to design the main parts of the website, and I used Django and like Python for a lot of the back end, algorithms and scraping and data collection, and then SQLite for any of the necessary database operations. I'll get into it a little bit later, but my database is pretty simple, so there's not a whole lot that I have to do with SQLite, but it just kind of holds the database. And then use the official movie database API to gather movie information and recommendations. And as I've discussed, the professors in this class, in previous presentations, I talked about PyTorch, which was a machine language learning library, which was kind of an initial goal of how I wanted to make my recommendations. But as you see here, it's not used in this current implementation of my site because, just for a variety of different reasons. One was that, it was as I was working through PyTorch, I would have to kind of hold a database, like a local database of movie recommendations, like locally, and it would have to be updated, like it wouldn't hold like new movies, and it would have to be constantly updated by me. And I wanted something that would stay more up to date over time. And I discovered that the movie database API holds recommendations for individual movies, not for collections, but individual movies. And I was kind of able to use that data to be more, just like kind of able to use more intuitively and kind of simplify the whole process and make it better to use. And I think in future, I'll get into the future work later, but this is how, in its current iteration, how the project works. And so, just more into the overall structure. So this is kind of a picture that represents the general structure of how my project is laid out. It's kind of a model view model structure with React being the main front end, the website that the users interact with. And then the rest, Django, the REST framework kind of helps take the my like backend Django and creates like API calls that can call back and forth between the front and back end. And the Django is kind of the view model, or kind of the view model that controls some of the ways in which the React works with the backend model. And the model is held, it's interacted with Django, but is held in a database. And so just the general UML of how my project kind of fits into that overall structure can be kind of seen here, more simplified. Down below at the bottom, you can see the React site, and so that site is what the user uses, and then it has API calls back and forth to the view model. And so the view model has a couple different calls or API calls that it can make, which I'll explain in just a little bit. But then it kind of serializes the data that's passed back and forth to the user model, and these are just some different systems in which the recommender is able to kind of give the recommendations to the model that are held, and then the scrapers, how it gets the initial information from Letterbox. And so then you have a user model that just holds the general user information like the username, and then it holds a films dictionary, which is the dictionary of films that they've watched, and then it holds the recommendation dictionary, which is kind of all the films that end up getting recommended by the recommendation system, and then it has the current recommendations info dictionary, which is to gather all the info on each recommendation, like I wanted to show in the project. I wanted to have each recommendation have information, but to gather all that information all at once is very it takes a lot of time, and to simplify that, I don't want to show all the recommendations the whole system spits out. And so I have this current recommendation dictionary to kind of just hold the current movies that are being displayed to the user, and then the database, this model is kind of held in the database. And so the more explanation on the API calls that I created in Django. And so the create user call, it's just a post call that kind of you insert the username and kind of the main function of the website. And so it, gets the recommendations from Letterbox, and then finds the user with that given username and kind of gives all the recommendations back to the user model. Refresh user. So right now, the way I have it set up is that once a user is put into the database, it's kind of held there. So that way, if you refresh the page and you press create user again, instead of doing the whole recommendation process again, it just shows the information that they have already inserted. And so if you want to update your let's say you go into Letterbox and you rate a bunch of more movies and you want new recommendations, the refresh user kind of allows you to refresh the recommendations and kind of recreate the user and show the new information that it's gathered. And then the get more call, and this is I'll show on the site, if you want to be able to look at more recommendations, if it displays 5 recommendations at a time, and the get more call, when that's called, will display the next 5 most relevant recommendations in the list and in their relevant information. And so this is the movie database API calls that I use. So they have a search feature that kind of is useful in a variety variety of different ways. You can search a movie based on its like title, which is what I gather from Letterboxd. So I search the movie based on the title, and it gives a variety of different information on like the movie ID, which is helpful for some movie poster links, and links to Letterboxd, and also just the movie poster information, and then the recommendations call. So for each individual movie, when you call the recommendations, it'll give you a list of it differs in the amount, but anywhere from like 5 to 10 movies that it recommends, and yeah, so that's how I use that general call. And so this is a secret sequence diagram that kind of shows how create user works to kind of better just explain the flow. And so so when you start up here in the React, the website, and when you press the create user button, it sends it to the serializer to kind of serialize the like information, the username into like something that the backend can understand. And so then it kind of calls the create user view, which is the main logic of what happens when a user is created. And so in that logic, it creates the user model. And then when the user model is created, it scrapes all the data from Letterboxd with the get user films call. And then after all the movies have been received, it calls the get recommendations. And so then it kind of gets the list of all the recommendations, which I'll explain in a little bit of how that works. But it gets all the recommendations and comes back, and then it gathers the information of the like 5 most relevant recommendations instead of getting all the info for all the recommendations just to save time. And then it sends it back to the view, and the view serializes it so the React site can understand, and then it displays on the website. And so this is how the create user works, and the other calls work similar. In the refresh, it's pretty much the same thing, just because it's recreating this process. And then the get more, it skips the get user films and get recommendations and just calls the get recommendation info again, and allows it to show more movies that haven't been shown already. And so just a better explanation of how the recommendation system works. There's kind of just a general flow of how it works. When you get the recommendation system takes in the dictionary of the titles of all the movies, and then it has a value of what the user rated it. And so then it calls, the get recommendations. And then for each movie in that dictionary, it goes through and gets the recommendations for the movie. And then so it creates kind of a recommendation dictionary in this recommendation dictionary. So it'll hold the title of the recommendations, and then it adds a value based on the movie rating for the recommendation, like weighting. So if you rate a movie 5 stars, the recommendations from that 5-star movie are going to be rated. It's a 1 through 10 system for this. So a 5-star movie would be rated 10. And then, if you rated a movie 1 star, it would be 2, because you can do like half stars. And so like a 5-star movie would have 5 times the weight. And then when movies appear again, so if multiple movies, are recommended, it continues to add to that same weight for that movie. And so it goes through all of the movies in the list, and it, kind of creates that recommendation. It says list, but it's more of a recommendation dictionary. And then it gets the info for those, like the 5 most relevant recommendations. Then it displays it, and this just kind of shows a call. If you show get more, it'll call this get recommendation info again, and it'll gather 5 more and then display those next 5. And so, how I tested this project. So, there's lots of, pretty much all Letterboxd accounts are public, so you can test it on any account you want. So, there's a list of, popular Letterboxd accounts that I manually tested with. That, a lot of these popular accounts have like thousands of movies rated. And, I was able to go through and kind of use that in my system. And while some of those take a long time, they're able to show that, it's able to parse through lots of different movies and, check for if there's any movies that, either not on the movie database API, or if there's any weird clunky errors, they can check for those large groups of movies, or able to check for that. And then I also made several dummy Letterboxd accounts, it's just fake Letterboxd accounts, to manually test a variety of different edge cases. And I'll kind of show some of these dummy accounts in my demo and how those work. And then eventually I want to make the site public and send links to friends if they want, and if they use Letterboxd. And I was working on deploying it. I ended up not getting a fully deployed working model the site, but I got the NexdMovie domain and I kind of pushed my site to it, but there's some clunkiness and with the back end, so it doesn't properly. If you go to nexdmovie.com, you will be able to see my site, but it'll be not working. And so this is just kind of a demo of how this works. So now I'll get back here. So I'm just gonna run the server. And so, so I'm just running it on my local machine here. And so now if I get a new tab and put it there. So this is my site, it's a very simple, it's, kind of easy to understand, it's just the site's here. And then there's an about page that kind of just explains what it is and, how to find your username if you're confused on Letterboxd. And so this is the site. And so just an example. So let's find an account. I have this account here called NexdMovie Test. And this, something I wanted to check when, kind of using these dummy accounts is making sure that recommendations kind of made sense and were weighted correctly. And so this is an example of account, this account has so like several like Pixar movies that are rated all 5 stars and several horror movies that are all rated the lowest score and you can rate half. And so when running this or testing an account like this, I wanted to make sure that the movies that it recommended me made sense and were relevant, similar to the 5-star, and were not necessarily and was not showing these half-star movies. And when creating my recommendation system, I kind of considered like, should I get rid of if a movie is rated below 2 stars, should it be considered like not considered at all? And I decided to consider it with the less weighting, because if a user, let's say, loves watching horror movies but also continues to rate them 1 star, but if their account is all horror movies, it shows that this is the movie that the user's watching. And so I figured it's kind of relevant to how it's recommended, but it's just weighted at a very much smaller weight. And so now if you press enter username, I'll make sure it's correct. And so it pops up a loading screen. And then once it's loaded, it gives you your list of recommendations. And so, right now it has, it's just 5 at a time. And each one of these posters is clickable. This is, I'll show you more of how these clickable links can be helpful. But, just to show an example, when you click it, it brings up the Letterboxd page. And right now I'm signed into another account that will kind of show more directly how this works. But so from the Letterboxd page, you can add it to your watch list, or you can or if you watch the movie, you're like, oh, I've actually already watched that, I want to give it a rating. You can rate it, give it a rating, and then come back to your page. And then one second, I need to move my Zoom view. Okay. And then from here, there's show more and refresh. And so you can show more reviews, and so then it gathers 5 more, and so it keeps going, keeps showing you different. And then so just an example of another dummy account. This one's kind of the exact opposite. This one's Kansas scary movie fan, and this one has lots of horror movies rated highly and lots of Pixar movies rated low, which is, I don't know, it's kind of crazy. Pixar movies are really good, but. And so now if you press enter, and so then it'll recommend you movies accordingly. And so this is, it gives you lots of horror movies, and you press show more. And then if you kind of, and so yeah, so this is generally how it works. And so then just to kind of show the refresh and some of the different ways in which it works. So this is an account I use to kind of test like random edge cases, like if there's only 1 movie or if there's no movies. So right now this has only 1 movie reviewed. And it's it's Forrest Gump. And so if you test this account, it gives you some recommendations, and eventually you can run into a wall where it says, oh, there's no more left, rate movies on Letterboxd and more. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna rate a movie. And so let's say you decide, okay, I'm gonna watch I'm gonna watch The Godfather. And so then you watch it and you think, oh, it was really good, but I don't know, not quite for me. You're not quite perfect, but just really good. You can give it a rating here. And so this is, this thing that I'm showing now right now works if you're already signed in, like if you're signed into your account on your like browser. So you can click edge cases here and then come back. And then if you refresh your reviews, then it'll kind of it'll give you some of the same ones, but then it'll give you more, and it'll just give you kind of new like relevant recommendations. And show the Godfather Part 2, the Godfather Part 3. And so it starts to give you and then that says rate more. And so this is just kind of an example of how it's kind of tied into Letterboxd and just kind of like a little small base level. And one thing, that one downside of my product, one thing I've been working to fix and make better the whole way through is just kind of the speed at which it gets recommendations. And if you get accounts with lots of movies, it can start to get slow. And so, for example, this is just like my account, and I have like around 500 movies, and it has like 7 pages, and so it takes like a minute or two to get the recommendations for an account like that. And a thing that could be scary is like if you spend 2 minutes waiting it, if you refresh it, you're like, oh no, like I lost my recommendations. When I press this again, is it going to have to like redo again? But it saves you. So like I put my account in earlier, and it saved that information, so I'm able to get back to it right away. And if I wanted to refresh and get new recommendations, it would take a while again. But that's something that I would continue to work on in future use. And so if you go to any of them, if you go to NexdMovie test, and you can refresh it and look at or Kansas scary movie fan, and so it saves all of the. And so that is just kind of a general overview of how that works. And so it's back to this slideshow. And so, I talked about it kind of a bit throughout my future work version 2.0 goals. I would, if like I talked about some of the flaws of the more like the machine learning recommendation engine. And while that, there are some flaws in the way that it is not like I would have to like manual update the like database backend to kind of get content based or collaborative filtering working. But it is something that is something that's like a little bit more complex, and I can control it more than the API. The API call, from what I've tested, is really nice and it works really well. But if I could have more control over just really checking to make sure the recommendations are always relevant, that could be nice in the future. And then I've like talked about previously deploying the working version of the site. It's almost deployed, it's almost working, but it's not quite there. And having a more direct connection to Letterboxd. Because right now, it's if you're signed in on the browser, it's pretty connective, and it's kind of nice being able to click on links and add them to your list or review them and get updated recommendations. But either being able to like sign into your Letterboxd account from the website, or having more direct tie-in, or even if like Letterboxd used the NexdMovie itself, because Letterboxd uses the same API, the same movie database API for a lot of their work, but they don't use any of the recommendation parts of it. So using it for recommendations would be cool. So conclusion, I made it fast, I feel like I made a product that was up to like, what I wanted it to be, implemented. And, I was able to kind of meet all the goals I set out for my initial 1.0 version. While not implementing the machine learning based recommendation system, I was able to find kind of an intuitive and streamlined way of finding recommendations instead. So just general quick overview, the site that I made is a movie recommendation system using letterboxd.com. It uses React.js for the front end, and then kind of uses Django for all my Python and kind of data scraping and recommendation algorithms, and kind of working with the model and the database on the back end. And with the help of the movie database API, I was able to gather movie information and individual movie recommendations that help inform the algorithm that I created. And that's it. Are there any questions? Yeah.
So why did you use Django compared to something like Flask?
I wanted to work with Django just because it was something I had a little bit of experience with in the past. Like I talked about my internship, they used Django for a couple different things, and I wanted to, I don't know, it was just something I wanted to continue to work with. And I could have used other models, but that was just the one that I decided to stick to.
So when you get the recommendations from Letterbox, I gotta keep all these straight.
Yeah, there's lots of names.
Well, you get your recommendation from Letterbox, and then you go get recommendations from the movie database. What exactly are you sending?
So what I'm sending, I guess where I find the. So there's a couple different calls. So when I'm getting the movies that the user's already watched from Letterboxd, those are that's kind of just sending basically a username and then going to the Letterboxd site and scraping, like, if I go to like one of these films pages. So each, basically I'd go to this films page and then basically go through. So basically I'm just sending the username and scraping all the data. Basically I'm scraping the titles and the ratings from the site. And I'm taking that in. I have that dictionary. And then when I have that dictionary of titles and ratings, basically I'm sending so I basically go through for a title and I'm able to, with the movie database, I'm able to call kind of like a recommendation call, like on that specific title. It's like recommendation, and then I insert the movie title. And so then that gives and so for each title, I'm able to get a list of recommendations.
So you have to do that for each title.
And so I have to do that for each title and then kind of go through and add all the recommendations up. And so that's kind of why some of it, when you get into really big accounts, is slow, because that's like all the recommendations for each movie and then gather them all and rate them all. So that's where some of the hampering of the speed comes into play. But that's just kind of in a general way how it works.
Okay.
So for bigger accounts like that, would you be able to count like how many times a particular movie is recommended and move that toward the top?
That is a part of. So basically the way that's kind of accounted for, because if you have lots of if you have a group of movies that are all rated like 5 stars, if when it goes through the recommendations, sometimes there's repeats, in the recommendations. And when those recommended, so basically the way it works right now is it's kind of like, because there's half stars. So the way I rate it, and like in the back end, it just through out of 10, because half star 1, 2, or 1 star 2. And when it gets a recommendation for a 5-star movie, it adds that title, then it adds a 10 to it. And then when that appears again, let's say another 5-star movie appears with that same recommendation, it finds it in the dictionary and adds 10 more to it. So then its value is 20. And if it's a 4-star movie, it adds an 8 to it and 28. And so it continues to add up and add up and add up. And so that's how, when movies are recommended more and more, it'll like be weighted higher in the system.
Cool. I see we've got several folks online. If you've got any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in.
Yes, Parker, about this query engine, do you also have search parameters such as minimum rating?
So that was something I considered. I had a version of my scraping system that ignored movies below a certain rating. I forget what I did. I think maybe it was below 2 stars or below 3 stars, and then one that just got all movies. And while both could work and I think both be relevant, I wanted to take into account if a user is if the user only watches horror movies and rates them all half star or 1 star, and maybe watched one other movie and rated it 5 star, that one 5-star movie and a sea of horror movie that's very different than a horror movie, and a sea of horror movies that are rated half star. I think there's something to the trend of they might be rating them poorly, but it's the only movie they're watching. So I wanted to kind of still take into account poor recommendations, because they might say this, they might watch the movie and say it's bad, oh, it's bad, but maybe it's a bad movie that they had fun watching, or there might be something a way in which they're however they decide to rate the movies that's kind of differ, the ratings are differ from what they actually enjoy watching. And so I wanted to take into account horror movies that they're watching all the time, as well as just movies that are rated highly.
Okay, so how are you actually taking that into account? Just
I'm taking into account because movies that are rated lower, they're still added to the recommendation dictionary, but just have like a lower weight. And so like, a 5-star movie, when it's added to the dictionary, like for the first time has a value of 10. And then if a movie that, it's recommended from a 5-star movie has a value of 10. And like a movie that's low recommended, if a movie's recommended at like a 1-star, it's recommended at a value of 2. And so if people watch lots of horror movies, or for example, then rating them all 1-star with the 2 rating, eventually that collection of 2s added up will like surpass, like if they have one movie rated at 10, will surpass that. So that's kind of how it's taken into account.
Okay. So this is just why you left out the search min rating. Right? The net effect is that you didn't do that so that you would have more options in the queue. Is that?
Yeah. So there's more, more movies from their personal site that are being accounted for, and also just can be possibly more relevant to what they're watching overall.
Okay, got it.
Very cool. Any other questions from anybody? Sure.
So Letterboxd had rating system, correct?
Yes. So if you go,
is there any bias to ratings on that? And how would you solve that if there's any bias?
And so the way the rating system works, so there's not, I guess Letterboxd shows like a general consensus rating from all the users, but the ratings that I'm using are more like individual ratings. And so if one sec, some of this zooms in the way. So if I go to Edge Case, which is the one I'm signing to now, and I click on this movie, I'm only taking into account the personal ratings of the user. And so it's like, so this user rated this 4.5 stars. And so when those recommendations are popping up, those 4.5-star ratings are taken into account. So, because it has this right here, which is this 4.1, which is like the general consensus of everyone on Letterboxd, but that's not necessarily being taken into account in the way that I'm building the recommendations for each user. But there is something to account where in the movie database, the way that they might like build the recommendations are if a movie is like generally consensusly higher rated movie, that might be getting recommended more. So there's something to account where there might be bias in that, but it's generally it's just if there's a bias, it's in attempting to like try to find movies that people generally like more than others.
Very cool. All right. Any others?
Just the last question about following up on what Russ asked about cumulative cost. Because of that overhead with the calls, using every title, is there a way to cache or memoize some of your searches?
So there is, that's some of the caching I think would be possible, and something that I had looked into, and I worked to optimize it kind of all the way throughout, and I think that would probably be the next step in looking into that and trying to kind of save titles, and that way or like save recommendations per title. That way they don't have to be continued to call over and over and over again, and instead the cached version of it can. So that would be one way, like one of the next ways in which I'd be continuing to optimize it. Yes.
Very cool. All right, Parker.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job.
Oh wait, a couple more questions. Did you see your survey?
I'm not a senior.
Not graduating.
Not graduating.
What are we gonna do?
So
We'll still beat him anyway, right? No.
We'll just remind you to fill it out when you actually graduate.
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
I'll make sure I'll log this for this time
So when
next
are you
year.
planning to graduate?
It'll be next year. I'm doing the like MBA attachment with the
Oh, okay.
computer science, and
Okay.
so but since I had a lot of like prereqs done in high school. I was able to squeeze it into 4 years still, but so that's why I'm able to, like, so I'm way ahead on my computer science stuff, but
Right.
I have lots of business classes to
Okay.
take still. We'll be doing a lot of that.
Cool.